I'm so excited to jump into session 2 because this one is so important, and for me it was so liberating when I learned the elements of what we're going to talk about in this session. Here's the main point of what we're going to talk about in this one, and that is that God built diversity into the body of Christ. He said, you can be who I made you to be. And He didn't force us into molds that didn't fit us. He gave us different spiritual gifts. He gave us different personalities. He gave us different temperaments. And as you're about to discover, He gave us different styles of evangelism as well. And we don't have to try to be something we're not, as we said in the first session. Well, I got to tell you, that was welcome news for me a few years back. That's because I signed up for a summer tour of duty overseas to do ministry with a great church over in London, England. And as I said, it was a great church, but what we were signing up to do was evangelism, and as I discovered the hard way, it was evangelism in a style that did not fit me. I couldn't, as this session says, I couldn't be myself as I was impacting others. I was trying to be someone I wasn't. Let me just tell you what we did. We got there and I talked to the team captain. He said, we're going to go out every day and knock on doors of strangers and tell them about Jesus. Well, let me tell you something you might not know. Americans fresh out of Heathrow Airport in London, England, talking to people who are strangers about Jesus is not a real popular thing in British culture. People weren't throwing their doors open and saying, great, where have you been? We've been waiting. The angel told us you were coming. It wasn't like that for us. It was difficult, and people were saying, why are you here and when are you going back? And I started to wonder the same question myself. It was really hard. And again, the point is, some Christians are called to that kind of very direct, hard-hitting, confrontational approach. It didn't fit me. And here's what happened. When I got back home, when it was over, I said, that's it. It's really over. I'm done. Next time someone tries to sign me up for an evangelistic adventure somewhere, I'm going to look them in the eye and I'm going to say, listen, I've done my time. This is not my deal. I'll write a check, I'll encourage you, I'll pray for you. Someone else can go this time. But this is not for me. But then I encountered some teaching from Bill Hybels, who later I co-authored this course with, along with Lee. And Bill taught some things that just rocked my world and gave me a new view of what evangelism could look like in my life, and really in all of our lives. And what I want to do is give you kind of an updated version of what I first heard in a sermon from Bill Hybels about how this diversity in the body of Christ, in the Bible, played out then and how it can impact us as well today. Now, before I get into teaching this, the specifics of this material, what I want to do is kind of a fun deal. I want to have you fill out a questionnaire. And you can grab your participant's guide and turn to page 19. And this kind of gives you some directions. What you're going to see is there's 36 statements that are going to, in varying degrees, apply to you. Some a lot, some not much at all. And you'll see the scale there. If it's really totally you, you put a 5. A little less, 4, all the way down to 1 where you say, that is not me at all. If it's not you at all, just put a 1 there. And let me just give you a sample. Let's turn to the next page, page 20 in your participant's guide. The first one says, in conversations, I like to approach topics directly without much small talk or beating around the bush. Now, some of you are saying, of course, why waste time talking about the weather or the kids? Let's get to the point, right? Well, if that's you, you'd put a 5, obviously. Because you don't want to beat around the bush. You want to get to it. Others, you're saying, that seems kind of rude. You should really talk about what's going on in your life and sort of ease into whatever it is you want to talk about. Well, if that's what you think, then you need to put a 1 or maybe a 2 on that one. So here's what we want you to do. Don't take a long time. Don't try to analyze and figure out just read it and say, is this me or not? Put 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. And then after you've done all 36 statements, on page 23, there's a place where you can then tabulate and add it all up. And then after you do that, we'll talk about what it all means. So go ahead and do this. Read each question, put a number by it, and add them up. Go ahead. Look at the one that scored the highest and maybe circle that one. That's probably your primary style. And you may have a couple other ones that were close and they may be secondary styles, or there may be some that are even and you'll, as you go, probably figure out which of them is really your more dominant one. But let me just say some of you are probably a combination of these styles as well, and we'll get to what all that means in just a minute. But turn to page 24 if you would, and what I want to do is just work through these examples, work through these 6 styles quickly and show you what they are in the Bible. What I'm going to do is give you a biblical character, and then we're going to talk about what some of the characteristics are of each of those styles, and then give you a chance to jot down some names of other people that you think of, that you think, I think so-and-so in my small group or in my church or next to me is probably that style. And we'll just do this on all 6. So let's jump in. Again, page 24. And our first example is what we call the direct style. And our person that we look at in the Bible is Peter in Acts chapter 2. And I'm going to go over here to where Peter was in Jerusalem. He was in the very city where Jesus had been crucified just a few weeks earlier. And he stood up and he did a very bold thing. He said, look, you guys, you killed the Messiah. You're in big trouble. You need God. And they got the point, didn't they? They said, what do we have to do to be saved? And he said, I'm glad you asked. He said, the good news is the Messiah you killed was raised back to life, and he wants to give you his salvation. And he explained it, and if you know the story, 3,000 people came to faith that very day. Incredible the way God used that approach. But here's what I want you to catch. What Peter did there fit Peter. You think about Peter. Peter was a bold, direct, hard-hitting guy. If something got in the way, he moved it. If Jesus was on the shore and he was in the boat, he would swim to the shore, or he'd try to walk on water to get to Jesus. Whatever it took, he was that kind of very hard-hitting character. Now let's look at some of the characteristics of Peter. He was confident, he was assertive, and he was to the point. You can write it in there, to the point. He didn't want to beat around the bush. He wanted to get to whatever it was, create some action. And you know what? Some of you are a lot like Peter. Now, maybe you don't stand up in front of crowds. Maybe you haven't even shared your faith yet. Maybe this is all new to you. But in business and in relationships, in the way you interact, the way you have conversations, you're very direct, you're very hard-hitting, you're very bold, and you like to get to the point. In fact, I would just be curious, just based on maybe the questionnaire and that description I just gave of the direct style, how many of you would say that's probably me? Okay? Couple here. See how boldly these guys raise their hands? Yes, that's me. I'm direct, and this is the best style, right? Well, I want to tell you, this is an important style. We need some of you who are very direct to stir it up for the rest of us, to create some action. And, I want to say, this is not my style, but I thank God for this style. This is the one that God used to reach me when I was 19 years old. And there's other people like me in your world that probably are not going to come to Christ unless someone like you and you who are very direct kind of get in their face with the truth, challenge people to think about it. So I hope that, you think of some other people perhaps in your fellowship, people you know, other Christians who would fit that style. And if so, you can also write their names down there as well. Let me go to the second example. This is the intellectual style. I'm going to go over here to the other side. Even though it's the same book of Acts, it's Acts 17, and we're now in Athens, Greece, and our spokesman is Paul, not Peter. This is Paul. And Paul used this intellectual approach. What he did is he said, I see that you're religious people. You have all these idols. And this idol over here fascinated me, the idol to an unknown God. Let me tell you about the God you don't know. And then he proceeded to logically lay out the case for Christianity. And he spelled it out in a great way. He even quoted their philosophers to make his point. And God used this, and some of those philosophers ended up becoming followers of Jesus through Paul's intellectual style. But again, the point is, Paul was doing something natural for Paul. It fit who he was. And it would fit some of you as well. Let's look at the characteristics of this one. People with this style are inquisitive, they're analytical, and you can write in the word logical. They're people that like to think things through. They want to know what people are talking about, what people believe and why they believe it, and compare notes on all those things. Like to study the issues. And my guess is some of you, many of you out there, are this style. Maybe you haven't applied it to evangelism yet, but in general, you like to think things through and maybe debate ideas just a little bit. How many of you, let's just raise your hands in this room, how many of you would say, this is probably my style? Okay, I want to have you keep your hands up just a minute so everyone can see who you are, because really, out of the 6 styles, this is the most important of the 6. Really, this is the most godly of the 6 styles. Oh yeah, by the way, this is my style too. All right, maybe it's not the most, you can put your hand down now. Maybe it's not the most important style, but we live in a secular culture that is moving further and further away from God. And this is so important that those of you that raised your hands especially, that you do your homework, that you prepare, that you be ready to give an answer. And use this intellectual style to help people kind of overcome their intellectual roadblocks to lead them back to Christ. And as I mentioned, this is my style, and the rest of my story is when I heard Bill Hybels teaching on these different approaches and he got to the intellectual style, it was like God used that information to put the key in my heart and turn the lock and open it up and free me, liberate me to be who He made me to be. He said, Mark, I want you to be involved in spreading my good news and my love, but I want you to do it in ways that fit you. And by God's grace, I've been able to do that now for a number of years since then, as I've done that in private conversations as well as through ministries in churches where I've led bigger kinds of events. It is so freeing. And I hope you're sensing that as well. And I hope that you maybe think of some other folks in your church who have this style. And if so, just jot their name down there as well. Let's go on to the third example. This is the testimonial style. And our biblical example here is the blind man in John chapter 9. And you know the story. This guy had been blind from birth. He sat and begged by the side of the road day after day, year after year. And one happy day, Jesus happened along. And Jesus stopped, and Jesus did a miracle and gave this man his sight. But before the guy hardly had a chance to blink, he found himself on trial for his faith. And the religious leaders were pressing him like, who is Jesus? And how did he do this? Where did he get his power? And I love what he said. He said, look, guys, here's what I know. I used to be blind. Now I can see. Deal with it. Like, what are you going to do? Argue with my experience? You know, I've been blind all these years sitting there, and now I can see. You know, it seems to me you ought to look into this Jesus that healed me. It was a powerful approach, and one that I think God would use in some of you as well. Let's look at the characteristics of this one. People who are good at this testimonial approach are good communicators. They need to be, compelling storytellers. And it's very important that they be good listeners, because you don't want to just talk about your life. You want to apply it to the other person's life. And in order to do that, you need to know something about them. You need to listen so you can be relevant as you tell your story. You know, all of us have a story to tell, but some of you can really specialize in this. And let me say, it does not have to be dramatic. Now, if all you can say is, look, I used to be lost and now I'm found, deal with that. That's a powerful approach that you can use. Let me just ask you, some of you, maybe you haven't used this in evangelism yet, but when you talk around the water cooler or, the locker at school or wherever you're at, people listen. How many of you would say, I think that's me? Go ahead and raise your hands. Anyone in this room? One here? Great. You know what? This is such an important style in our culture today, because as many people have said, we live in an experiential culture. People want to know, not just is it true, but does it work? Does it make a difference in your life? And when you tell your story and you talk about what God's done in your life, people listen and people say, wow, maybe if it works for her, maybe it'll work for me. And so I just encourage you to use that. And by the way, we're going to all learn how to tell our stories in this seminar, but some of you can really specialize in this area. And again, if you know others in your church that have this style, go ahead and jot down their name. By the way, Lee Strobel, this is really his main style. He used to be an atheist, used to be a newspaper reporter, and he talks about his experience. And then he combines it with the intellectual style, and he gives people reasons and evidence to believe. Okay, let's go on to the next style. This is the interpersonal style. And our example is Matthew in Luke 5:29. Now, you know who Matthew was. He was the tax collector. He was on the outs from the religious community for most of his life, and then he becomes a follower of Jesus, and he says, what can I do? How can I reach my fellow tax collectors? What do I do well? Well, one thing I do well is I throw a good party. Could God use that? Well, he figured out God could use that. And it says in Luke 5:29 that Matthew threw a big banquet in his home. And then he invited all his tax collecting buddies. And then he invited Jesus and the disciples. And he mixed it up with all of them. And I think he did this to deepen his relationships through this interpersonal style and to help Jesus and the disciples to get to know his former work buddies as well. Well, this was powerful, and God used it in that case, and I think he'll use it through you, through relationships. And again, I think all the styles work best through relationships. I think we should all try as much as we can to get up close to people that we're going to, apply our various styles with. But some of you specialize in this one. Here's a few characteristics of this. Those of you with this interpersonal style have relational warmth. You tend to be conversational, and you're friendship oriented. Your deal is all about people. My style, the intellectual, is all about ideas. Yours is about people. And I'll bet that's many of you. Maybe you haven't applied this to evangelism yet, but you love having a meal, having people over, letting God, kind of warm up friendships. And maybe you could use it for evangelism. How many of you would say that? I think that's me. Okay, got a whole row back here. That's great. This one, I just got to say, the situation we're in today, so many people distrust religious authorities and institutions and so forth, but they would come to dinner at your house, and they'd have lunch with you, and they would listen if you would just hang out with them a little bit. So this one is a powerful one, and it builds bridges to so many people in our culture, so many people that you know who need to know about Jesus. Again, if you know some other folks in your fellowship that have this one, write that down, because they could be partners for you. So maybe you have a different style, but they could be great partners for you. Let's go on to the next style, the invitational style. I love this one. This is built off the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. This is the woman at the well. Jesus comes down to the well, meets this woman, and has her draw water for him, and they get in a conversation. And Jesus brings up this topic of living water, and she gets curious. They have a great conversation, and he ends up telling her that he's the Messiah. Well, she's blown away, and it says that she ran up to her town and talked to the people there in her town and told them what she had heard. And then she just grabbed everyone she knew, and she said, "Come on down." And she brought them down to the well. And she said, "You got to hear Jesus. You got to hear this for yourselves." And they came, they heard, and some of them became believers. And that's how the church in Samaria started. It was through this woman's woman's invitational style. Well, some of you are a lot like this woman. Some of you have characteristics like this. You're hospitable, you're relational, and you're persuasive. You're persuasive. Whatever you're excited about, you get other people excited about. And I've got good news for you. According to a study George Barna did, if we would just invite our friends to church, 1 in 4, 25% of our friends, according to surveys, would come to church if we would ever invite them. I mean, for all of us, this is good news. I think we can all do that. Invite our friends to appropriate services at our church, or Christian concerts, or movies, or events. Well thought through. What would really fit for the person I'm trying to reach? That's something we all can do. But some of you can really specialize. This is like your area. How many of you would say, I think that sounds like me. I love to involve people and bring them to things I'm involved in. Okay, one over here. Well, you may need to trade in that little car that you have and get a big, minivan or a big SUV so you can put lots of people in it and take them to a lot of appropriate events. This one is one that many churches are built on when we invite our friends. So this is a really important style. And you may know some others that have that style, and you can jot down their names as well. Let's look now at our final style, or final example, and this is the serving style. And our example here is a woman named Tabitha, sometimes referred to as Dorcas in the same passage. Tabitha in Acts chapter 9. And she, it says in the passage, was a woman who served others by making articles of clothing for needy people. And, her service was done in the name of Christ, and it was done in a way that made people look to heaven and say, there must be a God. She was sort of a first century Mother Teresa. And it just made people realize there is a loving God. Well, when she died, it's very interesting. The passage says that God sent an apostle to pray over Tabitha and raise her back to life. So, this is a cool one. There's some advantages to having this style. Now, how many of you would say, this sounds like, well, let me give you the characteristics first. Those of you with this style are others-centered. You tend to, see needs that the rest of us don't see. You tend to work behind the scenes in terms of you reaching people or serving people in ways that are often not seen. And you need to be patient. This style often works more slowly than the others, but let me tell you, it reaches the hardest to reach people. Hurting people, people going through tough times, who may not listen to a sermon or an intellectual answer, but who would be open to your loving service done in the name of Christ. Now, how many of you would say, I love serving people, maybe this could be me, maybe this could be my style? Well, I just want to encourage you, don't underestimate the power of using this approach. And again, serving lovingly, no strings attached, but doing it in a way that says, it's the love of Jesus that motivates me. I want to serve you because He served me, He's loved me, and I want to spread that love to you. This is a powerful one, and God can really use it in a powerful way. And again, write down the names of any folks that you know that might have that. Well, now that we've gone through these 6 styles, what I want to do is a little exercise that I think is going to help you make sure about your style, as well as learn a couple steps for developing it. It's one thing to say I have the intellectual style, but that doesn't mean I know anything, right? I have to do my homework. And so there's some next steps we can take and some cautions attached to each one. So if you would, turn in your participant's guide to page 27. And this gives you some instructions for what I want to do in the next few minutes. First of all, based on your highest total, highest score on your questionnaire that we did at the beginning of the session, figure out what your primary style is. You probably already know that. Then go to that particular style in these affirmation pages that follow, starting on page 28. Find your page and read through that and check the boxes that you think apply to you. Now, if you get reading it and you think, I don't think this is me, then check out a secondary style. But probably you already know and you're going to get to the right one. Check off the boxes that apply to you and then identify one thing you can do to further develop your style and see if you can find one caution that you think is relevant to you to watch out for. Just do that, read through, find one step to develop and one caution, and I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, now that you've done this, turn to page 40 in your participant's guide, and I want to give you a chance to compare notes with the person next to you. I think one of the great things about this whole topic is that we can now compare and contrast and find out how we can work with the other people that maybe we came with or people we just got to know and partner with them in reaching others for Christ. So let's just look at the directions. It says, based on the discussions in this session, the styles questionnaire, and the affirmations that you just went through, tell the other person what you think your top style is, why it describes you. Then one caution that you want to watch out for that you just identified, and one idea for developing your style. Okay, if I can get your attention back, I hope that was encouraging to you. I hope it kind of affirmed and confirmed that you know what your style is. And I hope you got some ideas based on the different styles of the person next to you, of some ways maybe you can partner together to reach some of the people in your lives. I want to just go again briefly to the impact list in the back of your participant's guide and just record some of what we've just done. First of all, up in the upper right-hand corner of the impact list, see it says My Style. And there's a place there to write what your primary style is. And if you have a secondary style or maybe even a couple secondary styles, write those in just real quick. Okay, and then secondarily, just to make sure, if you haven't written down the person's name in the top left, go ahead and make sure that's written in. And then next, I just want to show you that it says next steps. And what we want to do is just be sensitive to the fact that as we're talking and as we're praying together and as we're doing the things we've been doing, God's Spirit may be speaking to you and saying, here's a next step I want you to take. And it may not seem real spiritual. It may be I need to hang out with this guy and golf with him, or it may be that I need to just build more trust, or I need to invite this person into my home. Or it may be to bring up some spiritual questions that you're thinking about or asking them where they're at. It may be applying your style in some creative way. But if you have some thought right now of something maybe God's kind of nudging you on, of a next step you might want to take, jot that down right now. I'll just give you a minute to do that. Just whatever you think might be a natural next step with that person on your impact list. Okay, now turn back to page 42 in your participants' guides, and I just want to end this session with 3 concluding thoughts that I think are very encouraging. The first one is, God knew what he was doing when he made you. You can just write in made you. He knew what he was doing when he made you. Your personality is on purpose. God designed, he didn't make you to be just like someone else. A lot of us spend so much time feeling like we wish we were like someone else that we respect. And God didn't want you to be a clone of that person. He wants you to be you, and that's why he gave you your personality. And he wants to work through it. And I think we can kind of take a collective sigh of relief and say, thank God he knew what he was doing when he made me. Second thing I want to say is God knew what he was doing when he put you in your circle of non-Christian friends. And here's why I say that. Your friends relate to people just like you, just like you. That's why they're your friends. Friendship is voluntary. They've chosen to be your friend, to hang out with you. That means you're the most qualified person to relate to them. You could put me or put Lee or your pastor or someone else in your circle, and your friend isn't going to relate to any of us the way they relate to you. So you're like a missionary in your circle, and you need to see those friendships with new eyes and with new spiritual possibilities. And then third, God knew what he was doing when he put you in your church, in your fellowship. And the reason I say that is there are people around you, people that you could partner with. Maybe the person you just talked to a few minutes ago next to you, but many others in your church who would have similar styles, or who would, more importantly, contrasting styles, who you could partner with, who you could work with. Maybe you're more the relational approach, but your friend then has questions. So you bring in someone in your church that has the intellectual style to help answer their questions. So you see, God put you in a fellowship, in a church, where there are people you can really work with. And let me just illustrate this briefly by telling you about a situation where I went into an ice cream shop with my friend Carl. We went in, and I was all fixated on ice cream. I wanted to know what the flavor of the day was. Carl noticed the guy behind the counter, and Carl, who's the direct style, looks at this guy and says, I see from your appearance and you can tell from your accent, you're from another part of the world. And the guy said, I sure am. And then Carl says to this guy, he says, well, I'm curious then, are you a Christian or are you? And he named another religion. The guy said, that's the religion I grew up in. And I'm sort of, I don't know what to think. I've been in America for a while. I'm kind of hanging in the balance. Carl kind of looked at me, hey, Mark, come over here. Answer this guy's question, because he wants to know about Jesus. I'm thinking, he does? I was just figuring out the flavor of the day. But I came over and I tried my best over the ice cream counter to talk to this guy and give him some reasons why we believe in Jesus and try to show him the logic of it and so forth. Well, thankfully, Carl, who's a real hard-hitting direct style, thankfully he has a wife named Barbara, who's more the interpersonal style, more warm-it-up kind of person. And she came in and she got to know this guy and then found out he has a wife and a child, and they all got to be friends. Well, then Carl went back to people in his Sunday school class and told them, and some of them came and shared their stories. Everyone had a reason to go get ice cream now, right? Spiritual reason. But they came and they shared their testimonies. And other ones came in and said, hey, we want to invite you to our church. You ought to come. And others came and they served him and said, tell us about your life. And they found out he was in the medical school in that town, and he was about ready to graduate. And they served him by connecting him with some people that helped get him a job later. So all the different styles worked together in harmony. And God worked through this whole thing and rolled the tape forward a year and a half. And this guy was now attending that church, the one that Carl goes to, Carl and Barbara. And he heard the message. And at the end of one of the services, this man and his wife and his little 6-year-old daughter came forward at the end, and they prayed and received Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And it was through a bunch of contagious Christians doing what we've just talked about, using styles that fit them, being who God made them to be. And I just hope, again, that encourages you. You can be used in ways you didn't imagine, perhaps, before you came into this session. Let God work through you. And I can't wait to hear stories of ways that God works in your life. Well, let me just say before we end this session that the rest of this course is going to concentrate on practical skills all of us will use. And especially in this next session, we're going to talk about how to build and deepen relationships with people that We want to get to know, and people that perhaps don't know Christ. And then we're going to talk about how to raise spiritual topics of conversation with them. So it's going to be a great session. We'll see you at that time.